On Father's Day, my millionaire son came to visit and asked, "Are you enjoying the $7,000 a month, Dad?" I was stunned and replied, "Son, the church is helping me survive." That's when his ambitious daughter-in-law opened the door. "I'm glad you're here. Follow my story to the end and comment from what city you're watching. That way, I can see how far my story has reached." The doorbell rang exactly at 3 p.m., just like it always did when Richard came to visit. After 63 years in this same house, I'd learned to recognize the sounds that announced important arrivals, and today was Father's Day. I hurried to open the door, wiping my hands on the apron I always wore when cooking. I'd made roasted chicken with gravy, his favorite dish since he was little. The aroma filled the whole house, mixing with the scent of the roses I'd cut from the garden to decorate the table. "Dad." Richard hugged me with that perfect smile he'd always had, the same one he used as a kid when he'd done something he was proud of. He wore an expensive suit, the kind that costs more than I spend in 3 months. His shoes shone so brightly I could see my reflection in them. "My dear son, it's so good to have you here." I kissed his cheek, noticing the scent of his fancy cologne, so different from the simple soap I use. Come in. Everything's ready for you." Samantha entered behind him as she always did. My daughter-in-law wore a white dress that probably cost more than 6 months of my rent, and her perfectly manicured nails held a bouquet of expensive flowers as she gave me a hug that felt cold and mechanical. "Happy Father's Day, Albert," she said in that sweet voice that never fully convinced me. There was something in her eyes that always made me uneasy, as if she was constantly calculating. We sat in the living room, the same one where Richard had played as a child, studied for his college exams, and announced his engagement to Samantha 5 years ago. The furniture was old but well kept, every cushion in its exact place, every surface clean, even though I couldn't afford the cleaning products I used to buy. "Dad?" Richard settled into the main armchair, the one that had belonged to his mother before she passed away 10 years ago. "I have to ask you something important." His tone shifted. He was no longer the affectionate son who'd just arrived. Now there was something serious in his voice that knotted my stomach. Samantha sat beside him, but I noticed she stayed unusually quiet. "Tell me, son. You know you can ask me anything." Richard looked me straight in the eyes with the intensity he'd inherited from me. "Are you happy with the $7,000 I send you every month, Dad?" The world stopped. $7,000 every month. The words echoed in my head like distant bells I couldn't quite grasp. The air felt thicker, harder to breathe. "What do you mean, son?" My voice came out weaker than I'd expected. "The $7,000 monthly, Dad. I've been sending it religiously for the past 8 months. I wanted to make sure you're comfortable, that you don't want for anything." Richard smiled with pride, as if expecting me to express my gratitude. But I didn't understand a thing. $7,000 a month. If I'd received that, my life would be entirely different. I wouldn't have to go to St. Mary's Church every Tuesday and Friday for the food pantry organized by the sisters. I wouldn't count every penny before going to the market. I wouldn't ask my neighbor, Mr. Johnson, to help pay the electric bill when it piled up. "Richard," I said slowly, feeling my heart beat faster, "Son, I haven't received any money from you." His smile vanished instantly. "What do you mean you haven't received the money?" "Dad, I send you $7,000 on the 15th of every month. Samantha handles delivering it to you personally." My eyes shifted to Samantha automatically. She'd been still throughout the conversation, but now her face had changed completely. Gone was her usual calculating expression. Now she looked scared. "Samantha comes here every month," Richard continued, glancing at his wife. "She tells me you two chat, she gives you the money, and you're always so grateful." I felt a deep pit open in my stomach. Samantha did visit, but not every month, maybe once every 3 or 4. And they were always short, awkward visits where we barely spoke about superficial things. She'd never, ever given me money. "Son," my voice trembled now, "your wife hasn't given me any money. I've been living off the help from St. Mary's Church. Every week I pick up the pantry items from the sisters, and when bills pile up, I have to ask neighbors or the parish for help." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard looked at Samantha with an expression I'd never seen on him before. His eyes hardened like when he was a child discovering something valuable had been broken, trying to figure out who did it. "Samantha," he said in a voice that sounded dangerous. "What's going on here?" Samantha stood abruptly from the armchair. Her hands shook slightly, but she tried to force a smile. "Oh, Albert, I think you're a bit confused. Don't you remember our visits? We always chat for a while, and I leave the envelope with the money on the kitchen table." But I knew perfectly well that wasn't true. My memory was sharp. I could recall every detail of every day. Desperation swelled in my chest like a caged animal desperate to escape. "No, Samantha, that's not true. You haven't given me any money. If I had received $7,000 a month, my life would be completely different." Richard stood slowly. At that moment, we heard a knock at the door. Samantha practically ran to open it, as if seeking any excuse to escape the conversation. When she opened it, I was surprised to see Sister Clara from St. Mary's Church. She was an older woman, about 70, who coordinated the aid program for needy families. "Good afternoon, Albert. Sorry to interrupt, but I'm here to bring your weekly pantry and remind you about tomorrow's meeting to organize next month's collection." Sister Clara entered with a grocery bag full of basics: rice, beans, oil, some cans of tuna. It was exactly the kind of help someone without steady resources would need to survive. Richard looked at the bag, then at Sister Clara, then at me. His face had changed entirely. There were no more doubts in his eyes, just a cold fury that reminded me of myself uncovering a lie. Sister Clara, unaware of the unfolding drama, kept talking. "Albert is always so grateful for the community's help. It's a blessing to support our elders living on limited means." Samantha stood frozen by the door, gripping the knob as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Richard closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and when he opened them, the fury had been replaced by something worse: total disappointment. In that instant, I knew something fundamental had changed forever in my family. The truth had come out, but the price would be higher than any of us could imagine. Sister Clara left after dropping off the pantry, oblivious to being a witness to the moment that would change everything. The atmosphere in the living room grew so heavy it felt like the air itself weighed more. Richard stood in the middle of the room, looking back and forth between Samantha and me, as if we were pieces of a puzzle he couldn't solve. "Samantha," my son said in a voice I'd never heard from him before, one that instilled fear, "I want you to explain exactly what's going on here." Samantha remained by the door, her hand still on the knob. Her face had lost all color, and I could see tiny beads of sweat forming on her forehead despite the cool air. "Richard, honey, I think your dad is confused. You know how older people can be. Sometimes they forget things." Her voice sounded high-pitched, desperate. Those words hurt more than any physical blow. Confused, forgetting things. Me, who remembered every dollar I spent, every favor I received, every day I had to choose between medicine or food. "Samantha," I interrupted, my voice stronger than I'd expected. "I'm not confused. I haven't received a single dollar from my son in these 8 months. If I had, I wouldn't be living on church charity." Richard walked to his expensive leather briefcase and pulled out his phone. His fingers moved quickly across the screen, and I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he clenched his jaw. "We're settling this right now," he muttered, more to himself than to us. "Here are all the transfers." He approached me and showed the screen. There they were, one after another. 8 transfers of $7,000 each, all to an account he said was mine. "See, Dad? Right here. October 15th, November 15th, December 15th. He kept listing the dates, but I couldn't focus on his words because something terrible was building in my chest. "Richard, son, I don't have that bank account. My only account is the one I opened 20 years ago at the corner bank, and there's only $300 in it." Richard froze, looked at his phone screen, then at me, then turned his gaze to Samantha. She had started backing toward the door, like a cornered animal seeking escape. "Samantha." Richard's voice was now a dangerous whisper. "Whose bank account is this?" I don't know what you're talking about, honey. There must be some mistake." But Richard was already dialing a number. I could vaguely hear a voice on the other end. probably from the bank. Yes, I need to verify account information. Yes, I can provide my ID. It's an account I've been transferring money to. The conversation lasted several minutes. During that time, Samantha and I stayed silent, but I could feel her eyes on me. When I finally looked at her, I saw something in her expression that sent a chill through me. She no longer looked scared. She looked angry, as if I were to blame for what was happening. Richard hung up and stood motionless for a moment, eyes closed. When he opened them, I realized my son had changed forever. "The account is in the name of Samantha Rodriguez Thompson," he said in a voice as cold as winter. "My wife has been receiving the money I thought I was sending to my father." The silence that followed was absolute. Not even the birds in the garden, which usually sang all afternoon, could be heard. It was as if the whole world had paused to witness this moment. Samantha finally released the doorknob and walked to the center of the room, but instead of looking defeated, she straightened up and fixed me with an expression that chilled my blood. "Fine. Yes, the money went to my account, but it's not what you think." Richard approached her with slow, deliberate steps. "Not what we think, Samantha. That money was for my father. Where is it?" "I was saving it for him." She lied blatantly. "I wanted to accumulate a large amount before giving it to him as a nice surprise. I have all the money saved." But I knew that wasn't true. I'd seen how Samantha's lifestyle had changed in recent months. The new dresses every time I saw her, jewelry she didn't have before, the new car she'd bought supposedly with savings from her job at the boutique. "Show us that money," Richard said. "It's at the house in our safe. We can go get it right now." Richard nodded, then looked at me. "Dad, do you want to come with us?" Richard and Samantha's house was in an upscale suburban neighborhood, full of large homes with perfect lawns and luxury cars in every driveway. I'd always felt out of place there, like I didn't belong in that world, but today the discomfort was different. Today, I felt fear. When we arrived, Samantha led us to Richard's study, where they had a wall safe. With trembling hands, she entered the combination and opened the metal door. Inside were important documents, some jewelry, and a white envelope. Samantha took the envelope and handed it to Richard. "Here it is, all your dad's money, the full $56,000. Richard opened the envelope. Inside was cash, but as he counted it, his expression darkened further. "There's only $12,000 here, Samantha." "Well, I've had to use some for household expenses, but I always planned to replace it before giving it to your dad." In that moment, I realized it wasn't just about money. It was about respect, trust, and family love. Samantha had taken the money my son sent with such care and spent it on herself while I survived on church charity. "Household expenses," Richard practically roared. "Samantha, that money was for my father. My father has been living in poverty while you spent his money on your clothes and whims." "Richard, calm down. I can explain everything." But Richard wasn't listening anymore. He'd walked to the desk and opened a laptop. His fingers flew across the keyboard with controlled fury. "I'm checking all our bank accounts, Samantha. I'm going to see exactly where my father's money went." In that instant, Samantha's face changed completely. The mask of the perfect wife fell away, revealing something cold, calculating, without remorse. "Do what you want, Richard. But remember, I'm your wife. Your father won't be here forever, but I will." Those words pierced me like daggers. Not only had she stolen my money, but now she was threatening me, reminding my son he'd have to choose between us. And in that moment, as I watched my son frozen between his father and his wife, I knew the worst was yet to come. The days following that terrible afternoon felt like living in a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Richard didn't speak to me for a full week, an entire week without hearing my only son's voice, without knowing if we could ever repair what had been broken between us. When he finally called, his voice sounded exhausted, as if he'd aged years in those few days. "Dad, we need to talk. I'm coming over." He arrived alone, without Samantha, which gave me a small spark of hope. Maybe he'd made the right decision. Maybe he'd seen the truth clearly. But when he entered my house, his expression told me everything. He wasn't coming as a repentant son. He was coming as a man who'd made a difficult choice. "Dad, please sit down." His tone was formal, distant, as if I were a client in his office and not the man who'd raised him for all these years. I sat in my favorite rocking chair, the one where I'd read to him as a baby, spent sleepless nights when he had fevers, listened to his teenage problems. Now it felt like sitting in the defendant's chair. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," Richard began, avoiding my eyes. "And I think there are things you need to understand." "Tell me, son." My voice came out smaller than I'd expected. "Samantha made a mistake, yes, but she's been under a lot of pressure lately. Her job at the boutique hasn't been going well, and she thought she was doing the right thing by saving the money." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Saving the money while I ate beans from church charity. "Richard, son, she spent the money on clothes, on jewelry. She wasn't saving it for me." "Dad, I understand you're upset, but Samantha is my wife, the mother of my future children. I can't just abandon her over a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding? That word hurt more than any insult. My son was calling it a misunderstanding that his wife had stolen from me and left me in poverty for 8 months. "Richard, it's not a misunderstanding. It's theft. It's lies. It's betrayal." "Dad, enough." His voice hardened. "Samantha has explained everything. She was scared to tell you she had the money because she thought you'd get angry if you hadn't asked for it directly. She didn't know how to handle the situation. And that's why she bought new dresses. That's why she got a new car." Richard sighed deeply, as if I were a stubborn child who didn't understand adult matters. "Dad, some of those purchases were necessary for her job. She has to look professional, and the car, well, her old one broke down." Every word from my son's mouth shattered me a little more. I could see Samantha had worked on him, planting doubts about my version of events, finding excuses for each of her lies. "And what about the missing money, Richard?" "We only found $12,000 of the $56,000 you sent me." Samantha explained she had some medical expenses she hadn't told me about, women's issues, but she's going to repay it all gradually. I fell silent for a moment, processing what I'd just heard. My son had chosen to believe his wife's lies over his father's word. He'd decided it was easier to think I was exaggerating or confused than to accept he'd married a thief. "Richard," I said finally, "do you really think I'd lie about this? Do you think I'd make up a story like this?" For the first time in the conversation, he looked me straight in the eyes, and what I saw broke my heart. I saw doubt. I saw my son wondering if his 63-year-old father was losing his mind, inventing stories out of spite or jealousy toward his daughter-in-law. "Dad, I don't think you're lying, but I think maybe things aren't exactly as you remember them." Those words were like a slap. My own son doubted my sanity, my memory, my honesty. Samantha had planted the seed of doubt, and it had grown into a tree that now separated us. "Fine, Richard." I stood from the rocking chair, suddenly feeling very old, very tired. "If that's what you think of your father, then there's nothing more to say." "Dad, don't be like that. I'm just trying to be fair to everyone." "Fair?" The laugh that escaped my throat sounded bitter, hollow. "Fair is letting your wife steal the money you send me while I survive on charity. Fair is doubting your father's word." Richard stood too, but he didn't approach me. He stayed on the other side of the room, as if an invisible wall divided us. "Dad, Samantha has agreed to repay you the money gradually. We're setting up a different system for the transfers. Everything will be fine." "No, Richard, it won't be fine." I walked to the window, looking at the garden where he'd played as a child. "Your wife stole from me and humiliated me, and you're choosing to protect her instead of defending your father. It's not like that, Dad. I'm not choosing anyone." I turned to face him one last time. "Yes, son. Yes, you are. And your choice is very clear." Richard stood motionless for a moment, as if waiting for me to say more, to give him permission to leave with a clear conscience. But I had nothing left to give. "I love you, Dad. I'll always love you, but Samantha is my wife, and I have to protect my marriage." "And I'm your father, Richard, but it seems that doesn't mean anything anymore." He left without kissing my cheek, without hugging me, without looking back. I watched him from the window, getting into his fancy car and disappearing around the corner, In that moment, I knew I'd lost more than money. I'd lost my son. The following days were the darkest of my life. Richard didn't call, didn't visit, didn't respond to my messages. It was as if I'd ceased to exist for him, as if the 63 years of unconditional love I'd given him had been erased from his memory. But the worst came when I started hearing the comments. Mrs. Miller, my neighbor across the street, told me she'd seen Samantha at the supermarket, complaining to her friends about troublesome fathers-in-law who make up stories for attention. Mr. Johnson, who'd helped me with electric bills so many times, said he'd heard rumors that I was losing my memory, and that's why there were family problems. Samantha had started a silent but effective campaign to destroy my reputation. She didn't attack me directly, but sowed doubts about my mental stability, my version of events, my ability to remember correctly. And the most painful part was knowing Richard was probably hearing those same stories at home. That every night Samantha reminded him how confused his father was, how difficult I was to deal with, how it would be best for everyone if we kept our distance. One afternoon while sweeping the patio, I saw a car stop in front of my house. For a moment, my heart leaped, thinking it was Richard coming to apologize. But when Samantha stepped out alone, all hope vanished. She was dressed in new clothes again, carrying bags from expensive stores. She approached my door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hello, Albert. Can we talk?" I let her in more out of curiosity than courtesy. I wanted to hear what new lie she'd come to tell. "I've come to bring you this," she said, pulling an envelope from her bag. "It's $2,000. It's part of the money I owe you." I took the envelope, feeling the thickness of the bills inside. It was real money, but somehow it felt dirty in my hands. "I also want to apologize to you," she continued, sitting in my living room as if she owned the place. "I know I made mistakes, but I want you to know it was never my intention to hurt you." "Your intention was to steal from me. Don't call it stealing, Albert." "It was a misunderstanding, a bad decision, but Richard and I have talked, and we're going to make things right from now on." I sat across from her, studying her face. There was no real remorse there, no genuine guilt, just calculation, strategy, the satisfaction of someone who knows they've won. "What do you really want, Samantha?" Her smile grew wider, colder. "I want us to have a good relationship, Albert, for Richard's sake. He's so stressed with all this conflict, and I just want us to be a happy family." "A happy family?" I repeated the words. "How can there be a happy family when it's built on lies?" "They're not lies, Albert. They're different perspectives on the same events, and I think it would be best for everyone if we left the past in the past." In that moment, I fully understood what was happening. Samantha hadn't come to apologize or make peace. She'd come to set the rules of the game. She was telling me she'd won, that Richard was on her side, and my only option was to accept her version if I wanted any relationship with my son. "And if I don't accept leaving the past behind?" Her smile faded for a second, and in her eyes I saw a flash of something dangerous. "Well, Albert, that would be your decision, but Richard is very loyal to the people he loves, and right now the person he loves most in the world is me." She stood, smoothed her expensive skirt, and walked to the door. "Think about it, Albert. Do you really want to lose your son over pride?" When she left, I sat in my living room holding the envelope with the $2,000. It was a small fraction of what she'd stolen, but it was also something more. It was the price she was offering for my silence, my dignity, my acceptance of living in a world where her lies mattered more than a father's truth. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized I might have already lost my son forever. 3 months passed like an eternity. 3 months without hearing Richard's voice, without a message, a call, or even a word through others. It was as if my son had decided I no longer existed, as if the 63 years of unconditional love I'd poured into him had vanished completely. The $2,000 Samantha gave me ran out quickly. I spent it on blood pressure medication, which had started acting up since this all began, and on urgent home repairs. The water tank had broken, and Mr. Johnson helped fix it, but I had to pay for the materials. I returned to relying fully on the church pantry. Every Tuesday and Friday, I walked the 6 blocks to St. Mary's Parish, stood in line with other elderly folks and needy families, and received my bag of rice, beans, oil, and cans. Sister Clara always greeted me with a genuine smile, but I could see growing concern in her eyes. "Albert, are you sure there's no way your family can help more?" she asked one Tuesday afternoon while checking the beneficiary list. I didn't know how to respond. How do you explain to a nun that your only son abandoned you because he prefers his thieving wife's lies? How do you say you've lost not just money, but the love and respect of your only family? It's complicated, Sister Clara. My family is going through a tough time. She nodded understandingly but didn't press. She was a wise woman who'd seen many sad stories in her years working with the community. The greatest humiliation came one Thursday afternoon. I'd gone to the market with the few dollars I had, stretching them to buy some chicken to go with the pantry beans. I was at Mr. Roberts's butcher shop where I'd shopped for years when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Albert." I turned and saw Mrs. Henderson, a woman I'd known from Richard's childhood birthday parties. She was the mother of one of his elementary school friends, and though we didn't see each other often, we'd always been cordial. "Mrs. Henderson, good to see you," I said, trying to sound natural as Mr. Roberts wrapped my small purchase of half a pound of chicken. "Oh, Albert, it's great running into you. I bumped into your daughter-in-law, Samantha, at the new mall recently." My stomach tightened immediately. "Oh, yes. She was shopping at those fancy stores I wouldn't dream of entering." She looked gorgeous, very elegant. Mrs. Henderson smiled, but something in her eyes made me nervous. We chatted and she told me Richard spoils her rotten, gives her everything she wants. "That's good," I murmured, paying Mr. Roberts my $20. "But she also told me something that worried me a lot, Albert." Mrs. Henderson's voice turned serious, intimate. "She said you've been a bit confused lately, that you sometimes forget things or make up situations that didn't happen." I felt like a bucket of ice water had been dumped over me. "What exactly did she say?" "Oh, Albert, I don't want to meddle in family matters, but she said you accuse people of things they didn't do, that Richard is very worried about your mental state, that they're considering taking you to a specialist doctor." Mrs. Henderson's words felt like stabs. Samantha hadn't just stolen from me and convinced my son I was crazy. She was now spreading that lie throughout the neighborhood, destroying my reputation with people who'd known me for years. "Mrs. Henderson," I said, keeping my voice steady, "do you really think I'd make up stories?" She looked at me with an expression that was half pity, half discomfort. "Oh, Albert, I've known you for many years and you've always been so level-headed. But age does strange things to all of us sometimes. My own dad in his later years would say things that didn't make sense. I'm not senile, Mrs. Henderson." "Of course not, dear. But maybe it would be good to talk to a doctor, right? Just to put the family's mind at ease." I left the market feeling an enormous weight on my chest. Not only had I lost my son and been robbed by my daughter-in-law, but now the whole neighborhood thought I was losing my mind. That night, sitting in my rocking chair, staring at Richard's photos in the living room, I realized how completely alone I was. I had no living siblings. My parents had died years ago, and my few cousins lived in other states. Richard had been my only real family, my only purpose, my reason to keep going after his mother died. And now I had nothing. The days became a mechanical routine of survival. I'd get up, do housework, watch a little TV, cook with what little I had, and go to bed early to save on electricity. Weekends were the worst, because they used to be when Richard visited, filling my house with laughter and life. One Saturday morning, while watering the garden plants, I saw a familiar car park in front of my house. My heart raced, thinking it was Richard, but when the door opened, Samantha stepped out. Not alone this time. With her was an older woman I didn't know, well-dressed, with expensive glasses and an air of authority that put me on alert immediately. Samantha approached the door with her usual fake smile, but the woman with her eyed me appraisingly like a lab specimen. "Hello, Albert. This is Dr. Emily Ward. She's a specialist in memory issues in older adults." I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. "A doctor?" "Yes," Dr. Ward interjected in a professional but condescending tone. "Your daughter-in-law told me about some concerning episodes you've had lately. Confusion, memory loss, unfounded accusations toward family members." "I haven't had any episodes of confusion," I said, feeling anger rise in my chest. Mr. Thompson, Dr. Ward consulted a notebook in her hand. According to your family, you've been accusing your daughter-in-law of stealing money that never existed, inventing visits that did occur, creating family conflicts based on imaginary situations. That's not true. My voice came out louder than expected. Samantha did steal the money my son was sending me. Dr. Ward and Samantha exchanged a glance that made me feel like a petulant child throwing a tantrum. Mr. Thompson, Dr. Ward continued, denial is very common in these cases. Patients with early cognitive decline often— I don't have cognitive decline, I shouted, losing control completely. Samantha is a thief and a liar, and she's convinced my son I'm crazy. Albert, please calm down, Samantha said softly, acting like the victim of an out-of-control elderly man. See how upset you're getting? That's why we're worried about you. Dr. Ward jotted notes quickly in her notebook. Aggression, paranoia, persistent accusations toward family. Yes, we definitely need some tests. I don't need any tests. I need my son to stop believing this woman's lies. Mr. Thompson. Dr. Ward closed her notebook and looked at me with false compassion. I understand this is hard for you, but your family just wants to help. There are medications that can manage these symptoms. Get out of my house, I shouted, unable to hold back tears of frustration and rage. Both of you, out now. Samantha and Dr. Ward left, but before getting in the car, I heard Dr. Ward tell Samantha, there are clear signs of decline. I'll draft a report so you can start the legal guardianship process if needed. Those words froze my blood. Guardianship. They wanted to declare me mentally incompetent so Richard and Samantha could control my life completely. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced the house, looking at every corner, every object that had witnessed the life I'd built over 63 years. My home, where I'd raised Richard, cared for my wife until her death, lived every important moment. And now they wanted to take it all based on a woman's lies who'd stolen from me and manipulated my son into abandoning me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something stronger than sadness and despair. I felt a cold, calculated rage growing in my chest like a fire that had slumbered too long. I wouldn't let them declare me insane. I wouldn't let Samantha win completely. And I certainly wouldn't let them take my home and dignity without a fight. But to fight, I needed weapons. And for the first time in months, I started thinking like a man who'd survived 63 years in this world, not as a helpless victim. The war was just beginning. The call came on a Tuesday morning as I prepared my chamomile tea. The phone rang with an insistence that suggested something important was about to happen. It was an unfamiliar number, but something inside urged me to answer. Mr. Albert Thompson? The voice belonged to a young professional man. Yes, that's me. My name is Robert Hayes. I'm an accountant. I work for your son Richard at his company. Could I come see you this afternoon? It's very important. My heart raced. Is everything okay with Richard? Your son is fine, sir, but I need to discuss some irregularities I've found in the accounts. That afternoon, Mr. Hayes arrived at my house with a thick folder of documents. He was about 40, with a serious face and glasses that gave him a formal air. But when he looked at me, I saw compassion in his eyes. Mr. Thompson, what I'm about to show you may be very painful, but I believe you have the right to know. He sat in my living room and opened the folder on the coffee table. Inside were bank statements, transfer copies, and reports I didn't fully understand, but they clearly showed money movements. As your son's accountant, I have access to all the company and personal accounts he manages through us. A few weeks ago, Richard asked me to review the transfers he's been sending you. He asked you that? Yes, I think he was starting to have doubts about what his wife told him. Mr. Hayes pointed to a series of numbers on the paper. These are the transfers from the last 8 months. $56,000 in total sent to an account in Samantha Rodriguez Thompson's name. I already knew that. Yes, but what you didn't know is what happened next. He turned the page. Look at these movements. Every time the money hit your daughter-in-law's account, she transferred it immediately to another personal account at a different bank. My breathing quickened. Another account, a secret one Richard didn't know about. And look at what the money was spent on. He showed a long list of purchases: designer clothes, jewelry, beauty treatments, trips, even payments for an apartment she's renting downtown. An apartment? What did Samantha need an apartment for? Mr. Hayes looked at me seriously. Mr. Thompson, I believe your daughter-in-law is planning to divorce your son. The apartment is in her name. She's been accumulating personal assets and moving money to accounts Richard can't touch. I felt the world stop. Does Richard know this? Not yet. I just finished the investigation last night. But there's more. He pulled out another set of documents. She's also been using your son's corporate credit card for personal expenses. In total, she's diverted nearly $200,000 over the last 2 years. $200,000, an amount I couldn't even imagine while I'd been eating charity beans and begging for help with the lights. Mr. Hayes, are you going to show this to Richard? Yes, sir. In fact, I have a meeting with him tomorrow morning, but I wanted to speak with you first because I think you'll need support when all this comes out. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed in bed, thinking about everything Mr. Hayes had shown me. It wasn't just that Samantha had stolen from me. She'd been stealing from Richard too, planning to bleed him dry before leaving. And the worst was knowing my son had defended a woman, betraying him in the cruelest way. The next day, around noon, I heard a car screech to a stop in front of my house. I looked out the window and saw Richard getting out, his face completely distraught. He ran to my door, and I knew he'd spoken with Mr. Hayes. When I opened the door, my son looked like he'd aged a decade overnight. His eyes were red, his clothes wrinkled, and he held the same folder Mr. Hayes had shown me. "Dad," his voice broke. "Forgive me. Please forgive me." He collapsed into my arms like a child with nightmares. He cried on my shoulder for several minutes while I patted his back, as I'd done thousands of times in his childhood. "Dad, you were right about everything. Samantha isn't the woman I thought she was." I led him to the living room and got him a glass of water. He looked shattered, completely broken. "Mr. Hayes showed me everything this morning. The statements, transfers, secret apartment, credit cards, all of it." He ran his hands over his face. "Dad, she's been stealing from me for years. Not just from you, from me too. Where is she now?" "I don't know. When I got home after the meeting with Hayes, she was gone. She took all her things, emptied the safe, and left this." He showed me a handwritten letter. The writing was elegant, careful, but the words were poison. "Richard, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Our marriage was a mistake from the start. You never gave me what I deserved. You always put your father above me. I'm leaving with someone who knows how to value me. Don't try to find me. I've spoken to a lawyer and will file for divorce." "Samantha." "With someone else?" I asked, though deep down I already suspected. "Yes, Dad. It seems she's been seeing another man for months. The apartment wasn't just for her." Richard broke down again. "Dad, I was an idiot. I defended her when you were telling me the truth. I doubted my own father for a woman who lied about everything." I hugged him, feeling him tremble in my arms. "Richard, son, she manipulated you. That's what people like her do. But I should have known better. You're my father. You've known me since before I was born. How could I doubt you?" "Because she was good at what she did, and because you wanted to believe you'd found true love." We stayed embraced for a long time. For the first time in months, I felt I had my son back. Not the man defending a liar, but the boy I'd raised with love and values. "Dad, I'm going to fix everything. I'll repay all the money she stole from you, with interest. I'll cover any medical expenses you need. Richard," I interrupted gently, "the money isn't the most important thing." "Then what is?" "The most important is that you learn from this. That you never again doubt the people who truly love you just because someone else tells pretty lies." He nodded, wiping his tears. "Can you forgive me, Dad?" "I forgave you the moment you knocked on my door, son." But as I held him, I knew that while I'd gotten Richard back, the scars from these months wouldn't fade easily. I'd lost trust in my son. I'd lived in poverty while my daughter-in-law spent my money on luxuries. I'd been humiliated in the neighborhood and nearly declared incompetent. The forgiveness was real, But he needed to understand things couldn't go back to exactly how they were. This experience had changed us both, and the new relationship we'd build had to be different. "Richard," I said finally, "there's something else we need to talk about." "What is it, Dad?" "The doctor Samantha brought here. The report saying I was losing my mind." Richard's face darkened. "Dad, that was Samantha's idea. She convinced me you were having memory problems, that you needed medical help." "And you thought it was necessary to bring a doctor without consulting me?" Richard bowed his head in shame. "Yes, Dad, and I regret it deeply." "Good, because that doctor made an official report and it could have been used to take away my home, my independence, my dignity." "Dad, I never would have allowed—" "Richard, you already allowed Samantha to control this situation for months. What guarantees you wouldn't have let them take my home too?" We stared at each other in silence for a moment. It was a hard question, but necessary. Richard needed to fully grasp the damage, not just the stolen money, but the betrayal of trust. "You're right, Dad. I don't have the right to ask you to trust me automatically after what happened. No, son, you don't. But you do have the chance to earn that trust back." He nodded slowly. "What do you need me to do?" "First, go to that doctor and demand she withdraw her report. I want it officially clear there's nothing wrong with my mind." "Done." "Second, recover every dollar Samantha stole. Not just what was mine, but everything she took from you too." "I'm already working on that with Mr. Hayes." "And third," I said, looking him straight in the eyes, "I want you to understand our relationship will be different from now on. I love you, Richard, but I won't accept being treated as a burden or someone who can be easily doubted." "I understand, Dad, truly. And I promise to spend the rest of my life proving I deserve your forgiveness." I looked at him for a long moment, studying his face, searching for genuine sincerity. What I saw was a broken man who'd finally learned a hard lesson about the value of true family. "Okay, Richard, we'll try." But as we embraced again, I knew that though Samantha was gone, the consequences of her lies and manipulations would linger. The difference was we'd face them together as father and son, not as enemies divided by a stranger's deceptions. 6 months after Samantha vanished from our lives, reality had settled like dust after a storm. Richard had kept his promises. He recovered all the stolen money, had Dr. Ward officially withdraw her report, and divorced Samantha without contesting any assets. She'd taken what she could and disappeared with her lover, leaving only debts and lies behind. But the most important changes weren't about money or legal papers. They were about us. Richard now visited every Sunday as he had for years before marrying Samantha. But these visits were different. He no longer came as the successful son condescending to his poor father. He came as a humble man who'd learned the value of true family the hard way. "Dad," he said one Sunday as we ate the roasted chicken I'd prepared, "I've been thinking about something." "Tell me, son. Would you like to come live with me? The house feels so empty, and I think it would be good for me to have you close." The offer surprised me. Richard's house was beautiful, large, full of comforts I'd never had. But after everything, the idea of depending on him again, even with good intentions, made me uneasy. "Richard, I appreciate the offer, but I'm fine here in my home." "But Dad, you could have your own room, private bath. You wouldn't have to worry about expenses anymore." "Son," I interrupted gently, "it's not about the comforts. It's about my independence." I saw confusion in his eyes. For him, after what happened, it seemed natural I'd want the security of being near him, cared for and protected. "I don't understand, Dad." "Richard, during the months Samantha stole from me and you abandoned me, I learned something vital. I learned I can survive alone. I learned I don't need anyone to care for me to have dignity. But I want to take care of you, Dad. I want to make up for everything I put you through. And I appreciate that, son. But the way to make up for it isn't by making me depend on you again. It's by respecting my ability to make my own choices." Richard stayed quiet for a moment, processing my words. He'd matured a lot in these months, but it still took effort for him to see I'd changed too. So, what do you want, Dad? I want us to be family, but as equals. I want you to visit because you enjoy my company, not out of obligation. I want you to respect my decisions, even when you don't understand them. And I want you never to doubt my word again just because someone else says differently. I get it, truly, he nodded slowly. I think I do. You want love, not pity, respect, not charity. Exactly. We set new rules for our relationship. Richard gave me a reasonable monthly amount for expenses, but in my own bank account under my full control. He visited every Sunday, but if I ever didn't want company, he'd respect that. And most importantly, he'd promised never to let a third person interfere in our father-son bond again. The real test of these new boundaries came 3 months later, when Richard started dating a new woman. Her name was Helen. She was an elementary school teacher, divorced with an 8-year-old daughter. She was simple, hardworking, very different from Samantha. But when Richard introduced her, I saw something in her eyes that put me on alert. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Thompson," Helen said with a smile that didn't fully convince me. "Richard has told me so much about you." "I hope good things," I replied, observing her carefully. Over the next weeks, I noticed small details. Helen always found excuses for Richard not to visit on Sundays. "We have plans with my daughter," or "my family is having a gathering." Gradually, Richard's visits became less frequent. One Sunday, after 3 weeks without seeing him, I did something I'd never done before. I called him. "Son, can we talk?" "Of course, Dad. Is something wrong?" "Yes, something is. I haven't seen you in 3 weeks." There was an awkward pause. "Dad, it's just that Helen has had a lot of family activities and she wants me to join in." "Richard," I interrupted, "do you remember our conversation about not letting third parties interfere in our relationship?" Another pause. "Yes, Dad." "Well, that's exactly what's happening again." "No, Dad, it's not the same. Helen isn't like Samantha." "Maybe not, son, but the patterns are similar. She's gradually pulling you away from me, and you're allowing it." "Dad, she just wants me to meet her family, to integrate." "And what about your family, Richard?" "What about me?" The silence that followed told me everything. Helen hadn't explicitly forbidden visits to his father, but she'd done something more subtle and effective. She'd filled all of Richard's free time with activities that excluded me. "Dad, I don't want to fight with you about this." "We're not fighting, son. We're having an honest conversation, and the conversation is this. If you want a relationship with me, you'll have to make space for it. If Helen can't understand that, then maybe she's not the right woman for you." "Dad, that's not fair. Helen is a good woman." "She may be, but a good woman for you must respect your relationship with your father, not try to replace or minimize it." I hung up, feeling strangely calm. I'd said what needed saying. I'd set my boundaries clearly. Now Richard had to decide what mattered more. 2 weeks passed without word from Richard. 2 weeks where I wondered if I'd been too harsh, if I'd lost my son again by being too demanding. But on the third Sunday, I heard the doorbell at 3 p.m. When I opened it, Richard stood there alone. "Hello, Dad." "Hello, son." "And Helen?" "Helen and I broke up." I let him in without questions. I made coffee and we sat in the living room as we'd done hundreds of times before. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" Richard sighed deeply. I explained to her that I needed to maintain my relationship with you, that Sundays were our time. She said she understood. But then she started making comments about how I was a daddy's boy, how I needed to become independent from you. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her my father has been there for me my whole life, sacrificed everything for my education and future. I explained that respecting you and keeping our relationship isn't being a daddy's boy, it's being a good son." I felt warmth spread through my chest. "And what did she say?" "She said I had to choose between a serious relationship with her or staying dependent on my father." Richard looked me in the eyes. "So I chose." "Do you regret it?" "No, Dad. I learned my lesson with Samantha. I won't let anyone make me choose between love and loyalty. The right person for me will understand you're part of my life, and that's non-negotiable." We sat in silence for a moment, enjoying the coffee and the peace we'd finally found. "Dad," Richard said eventually, "can I ask you something?" Of course. How did you know to be so firm with me? How did you know not to let anyone interfere? I thought about his question. Because during the months we were apart, I learned something important, son. I learned it's better to be alone with dignity than accompanied and disrespected. Aren't you afraid of being alone? No, Richard, because now I know the difference between being alone and being abandoned. Being alone is a choice you make to protect your peace. Being abandoned is what others do when they don't value what you offer. Richard nodded slowly. I think I've learned that difference too. I hope so, son, because the next woman in your life will have to understand that respecting me is part of respecting you. We talked until night fell. Richard helped wash the dishes like he did when he was young, and before leaving he hugged me with the same intensity as when he was a child. I love you, Dad, and I promise I'll never let anyone make me doubt that again. I love you too, son. When he left, I sat in my rocking chair, looking at the photos in the living room, pictures of Richard as a child, of my wife, of a life built with love and sacrifice. I'd lost money, time, innocence about what people will do for greed. But I'd gained something more valuable: self-respect, clear boundaries, and a relationship with my son based on mutual respect rather than obligation or guilt. Samantha had thought destroying my bond with Richard would give her control over him and his money, but in the end, her betrayal strengthened our connection in a way that wouldn't have been possible without that trial by fire. Now, when I wake each morning, I do so not as a victim of circumstances. I rise as a man who survived, fought, and won, not through revenge, but through quiet dignity and unbreakable boundaries. And that, I thought, as I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, was the best revenge of all: living well, with self-respect, and my son's love restored on terms I'd set. The war was over, and I'd won.